Welcome back to the Fat Loss Academy podcast. I'm your host, Josh Trinchini, and in today's episode, I'm going to be discussing two topics. The first topic being how you actually burn energy, aka calories, and how you actually create a calorie deficit for yourself. So if you remember back to last episode, the first episode, I said I'll be starting at the very beginning, discussing the fundamentals of fat loss. So we start with the fundamentals and we build up from there to ensure we have a solid foundation of knowledge. So in episode 1, I talked about what a calorie deficit actually is and how fat loss actually works. So now we're going to take a look at how you actually burn energy, aka calories, because having this understanding can actually impact quite a few of the decisions you make on your fat loss journey. So when it comes to our daily energy expenditure, there are really two main components. We have the first, which is our resting energy expenditure, or our REE, and then the second, which is our non-resting energy expenditure, or NREE. Now, for those who are watching on YouTube, you'll be able to see the slides and the graph, which I have up as well. If you guys are just listening on Spotify or something like that, that's fine. It should still make sense as I explain it. But as you can see, roughly 60% of the total energy that you burn in a day, and this can vary, so it could be anywhere from sort of 50 to 70%, but on average, sort of 60% of the calories you burn in a day is your resting energy expenditure, with the other 40% made up of our non-resting energy expenditure. So let's break down those two categories a little bit further. So resting energy expenditure, what is this? So this is known as your BMR, or your basal metabolic rate. So the BMR essentially refers to the amount of energy that your body needs to maintain homeostasis, and it encompasses all of the energy required to keep you functioning on a daily basis. So this is everything which is, again, sort of think non-resting, okay? So basically everything that you're doing, even when your body's at complete rest, but still requires energy for you to function. So things like breathing, cell production and cellular processes, the circulation of blood throughout your body, basically everything to keep you alive. And the way that I like to explain this to people is like this. If you were to lay in bed all day and not move, you would still be burning a large amount of energy just so your body can keep living and functioning. So this is typically a much larger expenditure than what people think. In order to just keep your body running, it requires quite a large amount of calories to do so. So that's roughly 60% of your energy intake right there, energy expenditure. And then we have our non-resting energy expenditure. All right, and we can break this up into a further 3 sections. All right, so we have our non-exercise activity thermogenesis, which is NEAT. We have our exercise activity thermogenesis, also known as EAT, and then we have the thermic defective food, so TEF. So I'm going to talk about each one of those sections individually. So you've probably heard of these, but the first is our NEAT. Now this accounts for roughly 20 to 30% of the total calories that you're burning in a day. And this is essentially all of the movement which is non-exercise related. Okay, so think of everything that you're doing throughout the day which requires energy. So this is things like going to work, walking around at home, you're at the shops, even when you're fidgeting. Okay, so even if you're sitting on the couch, flicking through the channels on the remote, that still requires energy. And all of this energy expenditure is encompassed via our NEAT, so what we call that non-resting energy expenditure. So like I said here, another large proportion of the calories you burn in a day, equating to roughly 20 to sort of 30% of your daily energy expenditure. Next is EAT, so that exercise activity thermogenesis. Now, again, varies quite a bit, but this is roughly sort of 5 to 15% of the total calories that you'll burn in a day. Now, this is essentially all of the energy required for specific exercise and sport-related activities. So our EAT is defined as planned, structured, and repetitive physical activity that has the objective of improving health. So, for example, any sort of sport that you're playing, when you're visiting the gym, if you're choosing to go for a run, if you're choosing to go for a walk, so any sort of form of planned exercise is what we categorize as our EAT. And then finally, we have our TEF, so the thermic effect of food. Now, this is the amount of energy it takes for your body to digest, absorb, and metabolize the food that you eat. So if you think about any sort of meal that you're eating, for example, in order to eat that meal, it requires energy. It requires your body to work to eat the meal and absorb it and digest it. So that accounts for anywhere 5 to 10% of the total calories that you burn in a day. So that right there is a brief explanation as to how your body burns energy. Okay, so creating a calorie deficit. Now, in the last episode, we obviously covered this as being necessary for weight loss. Now, this can primarily be done in 3 ways. We either 1, eat less energy than what we're burning in a day, or 2, we burn more than what we're eating in a day, or number 3, we typically eat less and burn more, which is sort of generally the best approach. Okay? But with that said, it is generally easier to control what you consume in a day versus trying to control what you burn in a day. So if we refer back to that table of basically what I just talked about, where we have our resting energy expenditure and our non-resting energy expenditure, that non-resting energy expenditure, so your NEAT, your EAT, and your TEF, is fairly small compared to the rest of your day. Okay, so it is still only accounting for roughly 30 to 40% of the total energy that you are burning in a day. So even if you were to do a bunch more exercise, weight loss isn't going to be guaranteed. And that is a really important consideration I want to highlight. If we remember back, I said that your exercise, your planned activity, only accounts for anywhere between 5 to 15% of the total calories that you burn in a day. So even if you were to bump that up a little bit, it's not going to be having a massive impact on your total energy output. And I see so many people who get this wrong, and they have this automatic way of thinking that, if they join a gym, they'll lose weight instantly or something like that. Now, after owning my own gym for over 6 years now, I can promise you that I see this all the time. We have someone new who doesn't understand this information. They sign up and maybe they're smashing their training for 4 to 6 weeks, and they say, why haven't I lost any weight yet? Or they think, maybe it's the style of training that I'm doing. Maybe this particular style of training isn't good for weight loss. Let me go try something else. And it's totally wrong, because the style of training that you do has nothing to do with weight loss. And I really need people to understand this. And you need to try and forget, whatever influencer you see who's telling you different, or whatever information you come across on social media. And it's also important to consider what happens when we are exercising, or if we go to increase our level of activity, then chances are we also tend to eat a little bit more. Because our body is using more energy, our body wants to replenish that energy. So there tends to be an increase in hunger. There also tends to be this little reward in our efforts as well. So, sometimes maybe when you do extra gym sessions, or you do harder forms of activity, you may want to reward yourself. And, sometimes you go, oh yeah, I worked really hard today. I earned, this extra scoop of ice cream, or I earned to eat these donuts, or whatever it is. So sometimes increasing our energy expenditure can also have a bit of an adverse effect as well. But on the flip side, what a lot of people don't realize as well is that it can impact your energy expenditure outside of exercise too. So let's say I have a goal of weight loss, and I think it's a good idea. Maybe I'll start going to the gym even more. Let's say I train 3-4 times a week already, and now I want to train 7 times a week. I want to train every single day. Or I want to start doing longer and harder workouts. Now that's great. I am going to burn a little bit more energy by doing that. But on the flip side of that, my NEAT, so that non-exercise activity, is likely going to decrease outside of that. Because if I'm expending more energy in the gym, my body wants to try and burn less energy outside of the gym. So it's going to try and maintain some of the calories that we have. All right, and it's going to reduce your overall energy expenditure outside of the gym. So, for example, let's say you go for a really long, hard run. All right, you burn a lot of calories on your run. For the rest of the day, your energy expenditure is probably going to be quite low, because your body wants to conserve the amount of calories that it's burning. So, maybe that movement around the house is going to be a lot lower. Maybe you're fidgeting a lot less. So that's the other effect that increasing your energy expenditure can have. So if you do all of a sudden increase your activity levels in an effort to increase weight loss, sometimes you can actually be making it harder on yourself. So like I said before, you actually have a much greater control over how much you're consuming. Therefore, when it comes to weight loss, it's usually better to actually have more of a focus on eating less than what you're burning in a day, or maybe trying to control that variable more than just trying to control how much you're burning on a daily basis. Now, throughout these episodes and the upcoming episodes, I am going to be talking about all of the strategies for doing this, obviously, but I just sort of want to set the scene there and sort of get that thought process into people's heads. So, we've talked about what a calorie deficit is and how we actually burn energy. So what is the process for creating a calorie deficit for ourselves? If you wanted it to enter into a calorie deficit, what do you have to do? So essentially there's two main steps. First, we need to determine what our maintenance calories are. So this is how much I'm eating just to maintain my current body weight. And then the second step, we need to reduce that number by 10 to 20%. So let's look at determining our maintenance calories. Our maintenance calories is essentially the easiest way to determine this is using a bunch of different equations, okay? And what these equations do, they essentially try to determine what your BMR is, so that resting energy expenditure that we've just spoken about. And these equations do this based off of some general information such as your age, your height, your weight, and your gender as well. All right, so that equation gives us a rough idea of what our BMR is, and then we need to work out what our non-resting energy expenditure is. So our activity level, which is the NEAT, the thermic effect of food, and our exercise activity thermogenesis. And to do that, we sort of just multiply what our BMR is. So some examples of the more common equations which are out there. There is the Harris-Benedict equation, there is the Mifflin-St. Jeor equation, and then there is the Catch-McArdle formula as well. So essentially what all of these are just a bunch of different equations where you input things like your age, your height, your sex, your weight, and into this equation, and it's going to spit out what your BMR is. Once you have that number, you then need to multiply it by an activity factor to sort of determine what the non-resting energy expenditure is. So for example, you might have that BMR number, and then if you're someone who is very, very sedentary and does little to no exercise, you might times that by 1.2. If you're lightly active, so maybe you do 1 to sort of 2 workouts per week, you're going to times that by 1.375. And then obviously the more and more active you are, that multiplier becomes a little bit higher. And essentially what that is doing, that is going to provide you with your maintenance calories, which is the amount of calories that you need to burn in order to stay the same. Now, that's the old way of doing it. These days, we don't need to do that because we have a lot of online calculators, okay? Now, I just wanted to include that information because I wanted you to understand how these online calculators work, and essentially that is all they're doing. It's an equation which is inputting that data, and that's how we're going to get to our maintenance calories. So when it comes to using a calorie calculator, they're all quite similar, okay? At the end of the day, none of these are perfect. They're all still a bit of an estimation, but most of the online calculators are all very similar. So if you simply jump on Google, type in calorie calculator, click on one of the first ones which pop up, and it should have you inputting data such as your age, your gender, your height, your weight, and then your activity level as well, okay? Input that data, and it is going to spit out a number, which is your maintenance calories. Now, it also might tell you what your calorie deficit target is as well, okay? You can probably use that, but the first step here is I just want you guys to get your maintenance calories, and then from there, we move on to step number 2, which is minusing that number by 10 to 20%. Now, before I get into that, do you have to use a calorie calculator to determine your maintenance? Not necessarily. There are other methods. The first is you could track your food intake or eat pretty much the same thing every single day for a very consistent period of time and start to record your body weight. And if there aren't really many fluctuations in your body weight and you're sort of noticing that it stays the same, chances are you're eating at maintenance. But, you know, people don't tend to eat the exact same thing every single day, so that can be a bit of a harder way to do it. And the second is you could get some body scans. They can give you a little bit more of an accurate idea, or you can use some other fancy equipment, so you can use things such as breathing apparatuses, etc. But chances are you don't have easy access to that equipment, okay? So the calorie calculator, although it's not 100% accurate, it's probably the easiest thing to do. So we have our maintenance. Like I said, we now reduce that number by 10 to 20%. Okay, so let's say you went on, you used the calorie calculator, and it said that your maintenance calories was 2,000 calories per day. I'm now going to subtract 20% from that number, and that is going to leave me with 1,500 calories per day. That is my calorie deficit target right there. Okay, so 2,000 minus 1,500, that creates a deficit of roughly 500 calories per day. Okay, now I just need to eat 1,500 calories every single day for a consistent period of time, and I will begin losing weight. Now, you might be thinking, why are we aiming for that 10 to 20%? Okay, any less than 10%, very likely is going to be a small, minimal change, which means you'll probably give up because you think it's not working. Okay, and I'll show you that in more detail in upcoming episodes. And if we go any bigger than 20%, it's probably going to be a lot harder to stick to. Okay, especially if you are already struggling to lose weight. Now, chances are this is because you are either eating too much food, okay, or you might not be aware of it, but you're eating too much. All right, even if you think you aren't. So now, if we create a deficit which is even bigger than 20%, we're already going to be eating a drastically lesser amount of food, okay, which is going to be very hard to stick to long term. And we know that long term is key for weight loss. So what we tend to find is that 10 to 20% seems to be the sweet spot for most people, especially when it comes to a sustainability standpoint. Yes, you can go a little bit bigger than this, but you just have to think, is it going to be sustainable for the long term? There are other risk factors as well, which I'm going to talk about in a future episode, but things like losing muscle mass, a decrease in your performance, impacting your energy levels severely. So all those sorts of things too. So generally that 10 to 20% seems to be the sweet spot. And it also seems to be a size where we can make noticeable change as well. Okay, so we've covered how fat loss works, how we burn calories, and how to actually create a calorie deficit. In the next episode, I'm going to talk about how quickly weight loss can actually occur, okay, which can be a bit of an interesting topic because this can help set the right expectations when going into your fat loss journey, which we're also going to discuss as well. So thanks for tuning into this episode. Be sure to share this episode with someone if you think they might enjoy it or if they might find it useful, and be sure to leave a review and subscribe. Okay, if you're listening this on a podcast app, make sure you hit subscribe, leave a 5-star rating if possible. If you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. If you have a question about fat loss, feel free to send an email to contact@thefatlossacademy.com.au, and I'll catch you all in the next episode.